But let's move on to the next topic. And Jamie alluded to it. Yes, it is about Daniel Levy and his tenure at Spurs. And the question is this the worst crisis of Daniel Levy's tenure, 22 years at the football club? Jamie, do you think this is his worst crisis at this football club? Because he's had some crises here.
Yeah, I mean, if this is obviously, he's had so many, and if we discuss this is kind of the worst, then it really shows you how bad it has got. But yeah, I just think ever since Mauricio Pochettino left the club, he's just made kind of mistake after mistake. I said, Jose Mourinho obviously was not the right manager to come in. I think it felt like he's got the wrong appointment, maybe with Fabio Paratici and getting in the wrong sporting director as well. And we've just seen kind of countless decisions kind of leading towards this whole situation. I think maybe a lack of being proactive as well. That's something that's always kind of let us down. We always seem like we're very reactive as a club, and I just think that all the successful clubs are clubs that have a proper plan in place. Everyone in the club is kind of notes, singing from the same hymn sheet. It's all about being in a line, and Spurs very much is not like that at the moment. I think it just feels like the last 4 years have really been wasted. We've been trying to chase this quick fix for trophies. We've gone off in a completely different direction from where we are as a club in terms of, look, the way ENIC run the club, I can accept, but I want us to be able to commit to that. I want us to have a manager in place who's going to want to develop younger players. They can go and sign younger players if they want and give them to the manager, but they need to have a manager in place who's willing to work with these younger players. I'm fine with signing players like Jed Spence, but you've got to have someone who's willing to work with a guy like that. And we brought in Jose Mourinho, who obviously was not willing to work with younger players. Antonio Conte, who obviously again is a not coach who's prolific for developing players. He wants ready win now players. So it just felt like we've kind of wasted these last 4 years chasing something. And I just think it's obviously got into this whole situation now. And again, we know all the things that are going on at the moment with Paratici, no manager, obviously no stadium naming rights deal as well. So just so many issues kind of on top of each other. But for me, I think it's the last 4 years and just how it's felt like we've completely wasted it. Obviously it's just kind of all piled on top of itself. And we're kind of seeing the fruits of that now, unfortunately.
I'd actually even bring it before Maurizio Pochettino exited the club. I think this all started to go downhill in those 18 months where we didn't make that signing. And it's just kind of spiraled out of control from there. From that, we've gone from sacking Poch way too early where we should have given him that rebuild, and then from then on it's just been bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. The managerial appointments in Mourinho and Conte and Nuno, the Super League, furloughing all those staff and then retracting on that, and now all this. I mean, right now Spurs don't have a manager for the men's team, don't have a manager for the women's team. A director of football is banned from world football. We've got one competent centre-back in the whole squad, and our talisman main player, Harry Kane, is running down his contract and probably wants to leave the club in the summer. So we talk about Paratici's job being untenable. I know you can't sack a chairman, you can't sack a part owner, but is Daniel Levy's job untenable, Dave?
Look, I think it should definitely be under review, and I think it's getting to the point where it is untenable. Like I alluded to, there's a reason why he changed what Steve Hitchen and what Paul Mitchell's role were to a director of football under Paratici, basically giving him more powers because he's lost control. You look at reports coming out over the last few days, he's hiding away. That's also an example of a guy that's lost control. And you don't need someone that's reactive, sitting there hiding away. You need someone that's proactive, that's going to come out here and tackle all the issues absolutely head on. We've got a number of issues that need to be resolved, like we talked about with the manager, the DOF. The season's effectively over, so we should already be planning for next season in terms of recruitment. And beyond that, but what we're going to look like on the pitch next season in terms of manager, coaching staff, director of football, and players brought in here and players brought out, and all we're sitting here doing is delaying it. But the problem we have right now with Levy, Ben, is the fact that him and his family own 29.4% of ENIC. Levy and him and his family do. So, they're not going to sack him. They're not going to put the pressure on him. They're not going to ask him to move aside. And also, he helped set up ENIC with Joe Lewis back in the early 90s. So he's not going to ask him to move aside. So you've got a problem where the rebuild has to be football-led and not business-led. But we've got a guy who's brilliant at business, but has a proven track record of being a failure at sort of football and their decisions. So I would argue, why can't we look to move him aside into the role that they hired Todd Klein to do, which is bring in all this commercial business, which is what Daniel Levy has been so good at, and bring in a guy like Arsenal did with Edu to lead this sort of football-led rebuild, and it has to be that way. Look, many would argue, or some would argue that, up to the Poch years where we were challenging, just falling short of the league and getting to the Champions League final is sort of the culmination. But since then, the last 4 years have been totally unacceptable. And we can't keep going through this cycle where we're bringing in, win now people who have the track record of CVs, of trophies and everything else. And then every single one of them are leaving this club and fans are calling them dinosaurs, losers. They don't know what they're doing. They're past it. They're over the hill, this, that, and the other. And the reality is they go on and take another job and they go on and win trophies. We can't keep having that optics out there, that perspective out there. That has to change. And for me, the only way of doing that is moving Daniel Levy over to the commercial side and getting someone in here that has a bit of know-how about football, and getting him to sort of lead that rebuild, because everything has to be football focused on this rebuild. You have to have the product on the pitch. You have to have the staff in place. You have to have the recruitment staff in place. You have to build up the scouting network. You have to create a pathway from the youth system into the senior squad. And all that has to be led by someone who knows more about football than what he does about business. So that's why I think Daniel Levy has to move aside. But like I said, we've got a unique sort of model in the Premier League, that our problem that nobody else has, where your sort of chairman is immovable.
It's called the dictatorship model. That's what it's called at Tottenham Hotspur. And you should never have a chairman or an owner that is so involved in every single little aspect of the club. He needs to be letting football people do football things. And that's what my understanding was bringing in Fabio Paratici to the role anyway. Levy was supposed to take a step back from these kind of things. And in the end, he's still, claimed to micromanage every single facet of this football club on the footballing side and the non-footballing side. And if we carry on this way and he keeps micromanaging everything at this football club, there's only one way we're going to go. And that's not the way that we want it to go.
We're at a point now, right, where you see the gap on top four is closing. Brighton are doing absolutely everything spot on. You've got some of them clubs sort of coming up the rear. You look at the likes of Liverpool and Chelsea. I'm pretty sure they'll be back up around there next year. So we could very, very quickly find ourselves falling further down the table. And that can't be reality. You've also got Kane and Son, two generational talents sort of coming into the twilight of their careers. They've only got a few years left, and that's if Kane commits. And if you have to be ready for them guys to be for them guys leaving. What you have to have is you have to have stability. You have to have a solid foundation in place. Your recruitment has to be spot on to give yourself a chance of being able to recruit the right guys to be able to add what they add to the team. You also have to improve that backline, because once you lose their goals and assists, we're going back to a mid-table Premier League team. You take Kane's goals out of this, we're out of the team. We're already sort of mid-table, just hovering above relegation. So you also have to have things in place for when they leave, because if not, like I said, you will be a relegation team. And on the pitch, you're going back to where we were when ENIC sort of first took over, and then all you're sort of left with is a massive stadium, a massive training complex, state-of-the-art training complex, and, the optics of where everyone accuses Levy and ENIC for in the first place, which is self-gain and money and stuff like that, that then becomes reality. That then looks true. So, it's very, very important that we don't end up falling behind, because there's more money coming into the game. There's more and more teams starting to do things the right way. And if we don't, we're going to end up falling down. We've already seen. If we don't get the right director of football in here and the right manager, look what happened under Steve Hitchen and Jose Mourinho, where we ended up finishing seventh. That should already give us an indication that if your recruitment is wrong, your scouting department isn't up to scratch, you have your squad clogged full of deadwood that you can't get rid of, so you can't give any youth a chance. You're going out of cup games because there's guys simply here that just do not care. You're losing embarrassing games across Europe that you shouldn't be losing. You're getting beat in the league that you can't even put any sort of runs together. So all of our momentum every single season is absolutely took away. If you can't string the running results together, you have no hope. So it's very, very important that this next director of football and this manager is aligned exactly with what Daniel Levy wants, because if not, the warning signs were already there. And, with the game only generating more money and teams coming up, we will find ourselves falling further and further behind. And then if that happens, everything that's been aimed at ENIC and Levy then becomes true, like I said.
And on top of all this, like, we're hearing from Matt Law, I think it was yesterday or a couple of days ago, he came out with a snippet saying that they're considering a massive hike in season ticket prices, ENIC and Daniel Levy. And, like, how can they have the audacity to even think about it? Like, what we've been through as fans for the last 4 years, and they're considering hiking the season ticket prices from most expensive to, like, crazy to the most expensive of the most expensive. It's like, how can they have this audacity, Jamie?
They're just, so many of the decisions they make just seem so tone deaf. You mentioned earlier about kind of the furloughing of staff, obviously joining the Super League as well. And now we've got this situation where they're wanting to, during obviously, the cost of the living crisis as well, they want to increase the prices in a situation where there's so much uncertainty about what's going to happen next season. For me as well, I just think with Daniel Levy, no one seems to hold him accountable in that boardroom. I think he's got so many kind of almost nodding heads, in that boardroom where they're not. No one's saying, "Look, you're doing this wrong." And again, this is why he just continues to intervene with these, in terms of the football director, and just that's why he makes so many mistakes, because he's got no one telling him that he's doing stuff wrong, and he won't take advice either from the supporters trust. He won't take advice from the supporters. And then that's why he'll just continue to keep doing what he's doing. I think he just always thinks he's making the right decisions. Look, business-wise, I think he's made some great decisions for Spurs. Obviously, building of the stadium was great. Yes, obviously there were some mistakes in terms of the delays, but overall, business side he's done great. And footballing-wise, it's just been so poor. And the other thing as well, I'd like to say on the sporting director, I think, David, you mentioned about Edu. A guy who knows the club as well. Edu was a guy that come in, he knows exactly all of what Arsenal's about. And I think as well, they clearly, the owners at Arsenal clearly allowed him to get on and do his job. The number of players they've been allowed to kind of almost write off and remove the deadwood from the squad. For Spurs, we're not allowed to do that. We've got Fabio Paratici desperately trying to find buyers for these useless players that we want to get rid of. And we just continue to string around with them. And that's why I think Edu's been such a success. He knows the club and he's been allowed to just get on with his job. So that's another point with Paratici, and maybe, is he the wrong fit for the club? That's another concern. But yeah, with Daniel Levy, I said it's just no one in that boardroom holding him accountable for any mistakes.
That's the point I was making earlier, Jamie, where it's kind of like, if we had someone like that who understood Tottenham, who understood what the fans want, who understood the way Tottenham should be playing, he could advise that to Daniel Levy, and there doesn't seem to be anybody to do it. Any manager or director of football that comes in here seems to all be coming here for a payday, because they know even if they do a bad job, they're still going to get paid up. And it's only going to be temporary. You're only here for 16 to 18 months at a time. So you're getting paid up. You can move on to your next job. So a lot of people are seeing Tottenham as a payday, as a cash cow right now. And that can't change. And that's why, it'd be handy to get someone in here, or even at board level, who has an affiliation with the club. You've got lots of them around on match days, being up there in the fine dine restaurants and stuff like that, schmoozing fans. Why can't you get any of them into the boardroom? You've got Harry Redknapp out there with a wealth of knowledge who understands Tottenham. Why can't you get him in an advisory role? Martin Yeo, Jan Vertonghen is another player who he done an interview there, I think it was yesterday, saying that he's sort of been getting into the sort of business side of football and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's doing a degree at the moment, yeah.
And look for him to maybe work alongside someone like a Martin Yeo. And then when Martin Yeo goes, you have a concession plan. It's all about being proactive and pre-planned. But what we do need is football and people at this club that have an affiliation with the club to be able to bring it forward and in a direction that the fans want. And I think if you have that, I also think the fans will also give a bit more patience to a project or to a manager as well.
Yeah. And Sim, do you think that this is maybe the worst crisis under the Levy tenure?
It's tough to say it's the worst, because I believe where we're headed, right, is where we were 2 years ago. 72 days out manager, Harry Kane putting in transfer requests and wanting out and not playing for the team. But I feel like it's still recoverable right now. I feel like we're clearly headed in that direction, and we're clearly no manager's going to touch us right now. So we could easily go 70 days out without a manager. Harry Kane is clearly questioning his future, and why not? Why wouldn't he be back in the headspace where he was 2 years ago? So that's still very much a possibility. But what I would say is 2 years ago, that was all a reality. That happened. It was 70 days without a manager. Kane did one out. He did try and force a move. And as of right now, March 30th, that hasn't happened yet. This is a situation that Levy can still recover. If he gets rid of Paratici, hires a director of football, gets a club moving direction, gets a manager through the door, and who can convince Kane to stay. This is all definitely a recoverable situation. But it's definitely heading towards a situation which is definitely not recoverable. I think we're heading towards his worst crisis. I think as of now, we haven't quite made it just yet, only because it's still a bit recoverable. But for sure, we're heading towards his worst crisis that he's ever been in.
What was worse than this?
2 years ago.
You think that was worse than this?
I think it was worse than this. Yeah. I think it was.
So sure,
I think 2 years ago
so
we were absolutely nowhere.
2 years ago we actually had a sporting director that was putting plans in place.
No, we didn't before. We had to wait. We had to wait months for him to get hired.
For Paratici.
Yeah.
I mean, at that time though, when we were looking for Conte, though, Paratici was here, wasn't he?
When we were looking for Paratici came in
halfway through that, actually,
and Fonseca. Well, he came in and Fonseca was about to be lined up, and he pulled the plug.
Yeah.
So it was that must have been after Conte. I think that's when Paratici officially started, although he unofficially started work before. But I think 2 years ago,
Paratici was brought in. He unofficially started work in June.
Yeah.
And we hired
May.
Conte in November.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, that's the thing. He came in very late, didn't he, to the process of picking the new manager? Where I did feel a little bit sorry for him in that process, because he was given very little time to kind of come in and do his job. We knew I think we'd sacked Jose Mourinho. We did it before the cup final.
Since in April, and that's another thing. We, the state of the squad was in a lot worse position than it is now as well. 2 years ago, that's also another reason why I think 2 years ago was a bit worse than it is the whole situation of the club. Not to say if this situation carries on as it's going right now, it will be worse, 100%. I just think as of now, 2 years ago was worse, and it's easy to remember. Easy to forget, all the bloody crises that we've been under the Daniel Levy ownership. We remember sacking Martin Jol at half-time during a UEFA Cup game. I remember him, sacking Harry Redknapp after he finished fourth, and then hiring AVB, and then hiring Tim Sherwood, and what a mess. I remember during that time you didn't want to go anymore when we had Tim Sherwood. I remember you wanted to give up your season ticket. You had enough. I
was being dragged to games by Grandpa.
You're being dragged. This is enough for me. We somehow managed to recover the situation with Pochettino. It took a while, but then obviously, as you say, no signings for 18 months and the whole debacle there. So there's been so many crises.
I feel like that now, by the way, that I feel like back then by the show with I don't want to go to games now.
Honestly. And I don't begrudge you, but what I would say for me is I do believe 2 years ago was worse, and I do think as of right now the situation is still recoverable. But the problem with Levy is Jamie's 100% right. He surrounds himself with complete yes men, and when you think about it, the hierarchy, ENIC, they're full of people who are investment people, they're business people. So why wouldn't they think he's doing a good job? Why wouldn't they've seen him grow the club from a multi-million pound business to a multi-billion pound business, and they're probably all licking his feet. They're all probably kissing his feet, thinking that he's doing an incredible job, whereas the people in football can understand what he's doing wrong, because from a footballing standpoint, he makes so many bad errors. The problem is he's such a control freak, and we saw that in the documentary when he's literally every day he's in the training ground, he's sitting with the players with meals and stuff. He's hovering over every situation. He's coming into Mourinho's office at the end of every day asking for updates and stuff like that, how the team are getting on and stuff. It's like no one has room to breathe.
And if a player isn't happy and goes to the manager, they just go, all right, I'm going to go speak to Daniel then. That should never be a case.
We're being suffocated. We're being suffocated with the clutch of Daniel Levy's grip. That's the problem. And he won't relinquish any sort of control, and we're running out of air.
the culture at the football club also needs to change, though. You know, like Ben alluded
But that stems
to,
from the top, doesn't it?
100%. Like, you know, I think as well, the reason why, you know, some of the Pochettino players have been kept around, and I would argue it's been some of the younger players that he could keep on into this next phase, is because he has people down in the squad that he can trust, that will come to him and also alleviate and tell him the problems that's going on. And what we're doing is we're developing a culture where the manager comes in and he has least say out of anybody. You've got a captain who's been here over a decade. He has more influence than say. You've got players that, I would argue, in Eric Dyer and Ben Davies, regardless of what people think of them, has their service been sort of like 8-9 years worthy at this football club? But I would argue not. That for me is someone like legend status that you know has performed season in, season out. These guys haven't been able to do that. But the problem is we have them being able to go and bend his ear. Danny Rose walked in the All or Nothing documentary we've seen where, you know, he asked Jose Mourinho about playing time. He didn't like the answer, so he goes, okay, screw you, I'm going to Daniel. You know, you had Nuno who walked in, told Ben Davies, look, you're just not good enough. You're the B squad. You know, perform on the football pitch, train hard, you might get into my A team. Ben Davies doesn't like it. He goes to Daniel. You know, you've got a point now where you've got Richarlison, who's only in the door, Romero, who's not too long in the door. They're also going and demanding that managers are sacked. You can't have this culture at the football club because what it's leading to is you've got players coming out complaining about Jose Mourinho's training methods, man management methods. You've got they've done the same under Pochettino at the end of his tenure. They've done the same under Nuno and they've done the same under Conte. We're developing a culture where no one wants to work hard. They're complaining about being put through training drills, but yet defense is our weakest part of the squad. You know, they don't want to do the work. You've got some complaining that Pochettino overtrained them, and now you've got the same players complaining that they're being undertrained. And then you're seeing Joe Hart running along the training inside the training complex, bowling a ball, and Matt Doherty standing there pinging it with a cricket bat. You've got people going off worrying about golf, this, that, and the other. And the reality is, people are playing every other sport at Tottenham Hotspur, bar football, bar what we actually care about. And this culture has to stop. You can't let the players run the club, run the dressing room. And again, it's another sign of Daniel Levy losing control. This can't keep going on like this. It can't happen. And then you wonder why we lose to Sheffield United, Zagreb. You wonder why we get embarrassed in the Europa Conference League to part-timers against Ennis Mora. Because no one wants to work hard. Everyone wants to blame the next man. You got Joe Lewis who pays Daniel Levy to take the shit so it doesn't go up to him. You've got Daniel Levy who pays the next guy underneath him so the shit goes to them and people look at them rather than him. You've got him who hires the manager, same thing, and you've got the manager.
Oh man.
Oh, David was just in full flow. Was just in full flow, but I don't know what's happened to him. I think he's.
He's back. He's back.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, you know, you've got a culture now where I've ruined my flow, but you've got a culture now where you've got an excuse culture and nobody wants to work hard and everyone's playing the blame game. In order for this club to move forward, that has got to be one of the first issues sorted out. If you want a manager and a director of football to be able to implement what you bring them in to do, you've got to get rid of that culture. Because if you've got players going to Daniel Levy, but it also works where, you know, some of them have been here a long time, where I know for a fact they've got some relationships with some of the press. They can leak stories. They can send out the narrative about the manager. You know, all they got to do is talk to the staff in and around the training ground because they've been there so long. Do you hear what so-and-so done to me? They also speak to Daniel Levy. And all it does is it enables them to be able to keep getting managers out because they don't want to work. The excuse culture has to go.
Yeah, 100% agree with all that. And it does feel as though like they've been given that power because they know they're not going to be sold. They're going to be kept on because it's much cheaper to keep these players than pay up their contracts and get rid of them. And they know they're safe. So they're in a real strong position, these players. They can, if they don't like what the manager's doing, as David said, they go straight to Daniel Levy and say they want him gone. They go straight to the press and start leaking stories. And that's exactly why we've got this culture. And, you know, exactly why Antonio Conte is absolutely livid in that press conference and why he feels the need to throw them under the bus, because they have got all the power. All the power is in their hands. And that's why, again, David made the point as well. That's why you're losing these games. You really shouldn't, because they don't want to work hard. That when the pressure is on, they don't want to kind of, really take that into their own hands. And I just think there was so many good points you made there, David. It was just frustrating. Very frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely great points made by all there.